Okay, so the next two videos we're going to go over here is going to be Brian Tracy speaking about how to handle objections and also some more notes on closing. So I want you to take, some of these techniques that he says and use them to your advantage. Again, he lays everything out buffet style, so you can pick and choose what to use and what's going to work for you in this field. Now, a lot of this stuff is very informative. It's very important. I recommend you pay a lot of attention to it. Again, you redirect during the inside when an objection comes up, you're at the door, then you redirect. An objection comes up because you have a pitch to go right back onto. You're inside the house, you're doing the inside presentation. Objection comes up, well, you redirect, you go right back to your inside presentation. Well, now that we're done with the door pitch, we're done with the inside presentation, and we're about to sit down to initiate paperwork, now's going to come the time that objections are going to come out, and you're going to have to handle some of these objections. That it's going to be hard to just redirect and just keep going. You're going to have to handle some of these objections, plain and simple. And Brian Tracy is going to talk about how to handle objections, what you need to do, and I recommend you pay close attention to this and take his training and apply it out in the field, and you're going to see how amazing it works. He's also going to give a couple notes on closing, so I want you to really pay attention to that as well and pick up just as much as possible. So these next two videos are very important. Make sure to take notes, take a ton of notes, and make sure to listen to these videos more than once.
Now we're talking about the psychology of closing. The psychology of closing is very, very important for us to understand. Closing is the most painful part of the sales presentation. Closing is the part that we as salespeople hate the most. We become the most tense about it, the most reluctant, and it is also the part that the customer hates. As it gets closer and closer to the close, the person gets tenser and tenser. And our job as salespeople is to structure the sales presentation in such a way that we go to the close and we go smoothly through the close. It's almost like there's a bump at the end of the road, and we have the approach, and we have the presentation, and we have the part where we arouse desire, and then we have this bump where we have to get into action. And our job is to get the person over that bump as smoothly as possible, to make it as painless as possible. And I think the best example of what I mean is the story of the old fellow who calls up his dentist, and he says, "Bill," he said, "I got this rotten tooth and it's got to come out, and I just wonder how much you charge me to pull a tooth." And he said, "Jack," he's known him for years and years, he says, "Well, Jack," he says, "charge $35 to pull a tooth." He said, "Well, geez," he says, "Bill, that's a lot of money. How long does it take?" He said, "Well, it takes about a minute." He said, "$35 for 1 minute?" He said, "Isn't that ridiculous?" He said, "That's absurd." He said, "Well, Jack," he said, "if it's the time that's bothering you," he said, "I can take as long as you like." You see, we have an obligation to our clients to go smoothly through the close so that it's as painless as possible, because whenever we reach the point where we're making a buying decision, we start to feel tense, we start to feel nervous, our solar plexus starts to tighten up, sometimes our heart rate goes up and our throat goes dry. And especially if it's a big decision, we become very, very uneasy, because often these decisions are irrevocable. We have this great fear of failure, and our job is to sweep the person through the close as rapidly as possible once their buying desire has been aroused, and get them past the close and into wrapping up the details of the purchase. So our job is to plan the close in advance. And it's very interesting. Some people say that what you should do is you should plan your close in detail and then build your sales presentation on top of it, instead of planning the sales presentation and putting the close on top of that. Plan exactly how you're going to close. And wherever you're in a sales presentation and it's obvious that the person's interest and desire has been aroused enough, then you swing into the close automatically, and you have a step-by-step 3, 4, 5, 6 steps where you go straight through the close. You should know that so that you can do it in your sleep. All sales professionals have their closes planned word for word in advance. All amateurs, all people who spin their wheels in frustration year after year, just fly by the seat of their pants every single time it comes to the end of a conversation, with their heart pounding and their heart in their throat and sweat on their forehead, and hoping and praying with their fingers crossed under the desk that the person will take it. Major requirements for closing: you must be positive, enthusiastic, and eager to close the sale. The customer's requirements must be clear to you. You must know what it is that they want and need. The customer must understand what you're offering and must understand the value of what you're offering to them, which you found out from asking questions. The customer must believe you and they must believe your company. They must trust you. There must be a degree of rapport and friendship. The customer must desire to enjoy the advantages of the offer. There's no point in trying to close the person. Have you ever been on a used car lot where you walk on and you look at the car and somebody comes up and says, "Why don't you buy it?" And you turn around and you say, "How can you make a living selling with as insulting a line as that?" You've looked at the car for 3 seconds and they come up and ask you to make an offer on it. Why don't you make an offer? You don't even want the car yet. The product must be suited to the customer. In order to avoid high-pressure selling, those 4 requirements are necessary. The prospect must want it, the prospect must need it, the prospect must be able to afford it, and the prospect must be able to use it. Very, very important, the only pressure that you use in a professional selling presentation is the pressure of the silence after the closing question. The president of this company was buying a $350,000 computer. Put everything on computerized operations. And the computer company had been in, done an analysis, checked it out in every detail. They had prepared a proposal. They'd come back. They had put together the whole sales package, and they were coming in for the close. And he wanted to see how this computer salesman was going to close a $350,000 sale. So they came in, and the president of the company had his controller and had his accountant waiting to go over the final details. The salesman came in with his engineer and his computer programmer, and they sat down, and they went through the proposal, explained how it would be installed, what would be involved, what the warranties would be, how much help they would give them, additional consulting, and right down to every single ingredient, and then the price, and then the total price, and the final contract. And he said, "And if you will just authorize this right here, we'll get started on it right away." And he ticked it, put the pen on it, and pushed it across the desk. And the president of the insurance company said, "I saw it coming." He said he was going to use the silent close on me. I knew exactly what he was doing, and I just smiled at him. And he knew exactly that I knew exactly that he knew that I knew what he was doing. And so he smiled back at me, and I smiled back at him, and he smiled back at me, and we sat there for 15 minutes. And I was going to see if he was going to crack. And for 15 minutes we sat there smiling, and there wasn't a sound in the room. And finally, he said, "I signed it," and we both laughed. The pressure of the silence after the closing question. Recognizing buying signals. Well, these are common buying signals. The customer will begin talking faster, or will brighten up, or will ask about price. Sometimes the customer asks about delivery. Sometimes the customer changes posture or begins calculating numbers. Sometimes the customer asks smokescreen objections. Any noticeable change in attitude, posture, voice, or behavior can indicate that a buying decision is near. When you sense that, when the person starts changing or fidgeting or calculating numbers, say, "Well, when would you like us to get started with this?" Or, "Would you like us to get going with this right away?" Or, "How many would you like us to deliver?" Or, "Would you like us to deliver to your office or to your warehouse?" Ask a closing question whenever you see the person beginning to change demeanor. Reasons why the close is difficult, we've talked about this before, but let's just review them quickly. First of all, the salesperson's natural fear of rejection. We're very, very uneasy about being rejected, so we're afraid to subject ourselves to a no. The solution to the fear of rejection is simply this: do the thing you fear, and then the death of fear is certain. Keep confronting what you fear over and over again. Keep asking for the order over and over again until you get to the point where you don't have a nerve in your body when it comes to the close. This is very, very important. The fear of failure on the part of the customer, fear of purchasing the wrong article, fear of paying too much, fear of criticism for making a wrong choice. Do you know how many wives hold off making choices because they're afraid of what their husbands will say? How many husbands because of what their wives will say? How many business people because of what their partners will say? Remember, this fear of being criticized for making a wrong choice is a strong, strong subconscious fear that holds people back. Human inertia, laziness, is a real block to making a change. People are comfortable. They're in their comfort zone doing what they've been doing up to now. Sometimes you can have a cheaper product, a better product, a more attractive product, but it's just not enough, it seems, to get that person to change from their current supplier. And that means you're going to have to work on them, and you're going to have to work, and you're going to have to come back, and you're going to have to keep giving them more and more reasons. The reluctance to make a decision, because the buying decision can be so emotional. We know that there's always stress at the point of a buying decision. Whenever we feel stress, whenever we feel it coming out of our comfort zone, we push away. And that's why you have to get past the close as quickly as possible, or often you'll be sunk. And remember, The way that you overcome these obstacles or these objections is to be very, very positive in yourself, very eager to close, very enthusiastic. 5 closing errors to avoid. Telling the prospect he's wrong, arguing, trying to win. Never, never argue with a prospect. Never tell them that they are wrong. Never tell them that their assessment of your product is wrong. There's an old saying that a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So instead of saying, Mr. Prospect, you're wrong, say, well, Mr. Prospect, that's a very valid concern. And many of our other customers have had those concerns. And here's a couple of letters from people who had exactly these concerns. For instance, all the time, people are saying, your product is too highly priced. It's really too expensive for today's market. And you have sold them. Then get letters from these people that said, when we first saw this product, we felt that it was too highly priced for today's market. But then we went ahead and bought it, and this is what we found, and we're glad we did. In other words, get proof that can back it up. Get what is called third-party proof. So it isn't you saying that it's a good idea, it's somebody else who has been in the same position as the customer. Expressing your opinions to a prospect on subjects of a personal nature, religion, politics, labor unions, health, family, so on. Don't talk about personal subjects to prospects. Even if they want to talk about them, skirt them very, very carefully, because you can get embroiled in a discussion that will lead nowhere. Don't ever knock the competition. If your competition's name is brought up and they say, what do you think about ABC Company that they deal with? You say, Mr. Prospect, ABC Company is an excellent company. They have excellent products. However, many of the people who are buying our products once used ABCs, and they switched to us, and would you like to know the reasons why? And then concentrate on selling the values and benefits of your product, but never knock your competition. And finally, the last 2, assuming authority that you don't have. Don't ever make promises you can't keep, and don't ever engage in overselling or saying that the product can do something that it cannot do. We had a situation recently where an office equipment salesman lost a $6,000 sale for a very, very expensive automatic copier and printer because he said it would do something that it couldn't do. And he lost the sale, and his commission on that was probably $1,000. And he had oversold it. He hadn't bothered to check the specifications and find that it wouldn't do it. And as soon as I saw the machine, I said, it won't do what it's been bought to do. The guy said, oh, yes, it will. I said, no, it won't. I can just tell by looking at it. And as it turned out, it couldn't, and they lost the sale, and they lost an enormous amount of credibility. Moving along, I'm going to talk about closing on objections. Now, the basic rule of objections is that there are no sales without objections. That objections indicate interest, that objections are signposts that lead you on the way to closing the sale, that if you don't get objections, you're not going to get sales. There's 2 ways to respond to objections. The very best way is this, is take every objection and interpret it as a question. In other words, it's not a reason for not buying, it is a question requesting more information. If a person says, I can't afford it, turn it around and make it a question that says, please show me how I can afford this, or please show me that it is worth what you're asking for it so that I cannot afford not to take it. If a person says, I have to talk it over with someone else, what the person is saying is, please give me enough reasons so that I can go ahead and buy it without having to check and get somebody else's opinion. Whatever the objection is, throw out any objection that you can think of that you get with your product or service. An objection is not to be feared, an objection is to be welcomed, because as I say, objections are the stepping stones to sales success, or the rungs on the ladder to sales success. In your business, and in my business, and in every business, we have what is called the Law of 6. And the Law of 6 simply says that there are basically 6 objections to buying your product or service. Now, I don't know what your 6 are. I know what my 6 are. And I know what the 6 have been in any other product or service that I've sold. But every one of us has maybe hundreds of reasons or objections, but we only have basically 6. And it is very important that we sit down and identify what are the 6 objections. It may be less. For some, it's only 1. For some, it's 2. You know, for instance, diamonds. The only reason people don't buy diamonds is because they're too expensive. It's not because they're not beautiful. It's not because they're not valuable. They don't buy them because they're too expensive. So it may only be 1 reason. But basically, there's never more than 6. And in order for us to sell effectively, we have to sit down and we have to think through what are our 6 objections. What are the 6 major objections to buying your product or service? And what is a logical answer to each of them? So that when the objection or a variation on the objection comes up, you deal with the objection and you are prepared. You don't wait till you get into a sales situation and try to make up some answer, which is what most people do, and throw it back out. Keys to handling objections. Determine whether or not it is a condition. Does everybody know what a condition is? A condition is a reason why the person cannot go ahead. You cannot sell running shoes to a person who just lost their legs in an accident. That's a very strong condition. You cannot sell business equipment to a person who has just gone bankrupt. You cannot sell clothing to a person who's just gone into receivership and has no money. In other words, a condition is a specific reason why the person absolutely cannot go ahead. Many people, when they voice an objection, think it's a condition. Your job is to find out whether or not it is a condition. The person says, I can't afford it. What does that mean? Does that mean that they don't have enough to buy it for cash this minute? Or that they don't have enough to make a minimum down payment? What does it mean? And when you say, well, how do you mean that exactly? When you say you can't afford it. What if we space the payments over 24 months? What if you could get it with 10% down? In other words, is it a real condition? Does the person have zero money and zero income? For instance, if a person is unemployed, there's no point in trying to sell them something that's going to be financed over 12 or 24 months because they can't get approval for the credit. Number two is hear the objection out. Hear it out completely. That's very, very important. And listen to it patiently. Don't interrupt even though you've heard it 1,000 times. Listen to it, as we said, pause before replying and then answer it carefully and reflectively. Number three is ask for elaboration. Rather than leaping in and assuming that you know what the objection is, say, how do you mean that exactly? Or even better, say, well, as I understand it, and then repeat the objection back to him in the form of a question. As I understand it, what you're asking is this. And then go ahead and state it as a question, and the person says, yes, that's what I'm asking, and then answer the question. Easier to answer a question than an objection. Another thing with regard to objections is compliment the person on the objection. I found all my life when a person says, well, geez, I can't take it for this reason or that, you say, Mr. Prospect, that's a very good question, and I'm glad you brought that up. Or that's a very important question, and we have to deal with that in a straightforward fashion. People like to be complimented on their objections. And if you treat their objections as important and as valid, just like when we have a concern, when we're upset about something, we don't want somebody to dismiss it and give us a glib answer. When we're upset about something, when we're concerned about something, and we express this to someone else, we want them to think about it and be concerned, if you like, and carefully consider what our situation is.